So, what did you miss at Jubilee today? Well, you missed some great music. You missed some saxophone, a little trumpet, some beautiful organ, great piano, and just wonderful choir. Such energy today, which was nice because it sort of helped set us up for the struggle that we have with the parable of the talents. The story of the master who goes away and leaves his slaves or managers, employees, if you will, leaves one of them 5 talents and another 3 talents and another 1 talent, and he goes away for a long time. When he comes back, the first one has doubled and changed 5 talents into 10, and the second has doubled his as well, turning 3 into 6, and the third manager has buried his talent in the ground and returns to his master 1 talent. And the master praises those who invested and made money, who doubled their return. But then he curses the third manager, calling him worthless and lazy, saying he could have at least invested it in the bank and therefore returned interest. And then he says that take the talent from him and give it to the one who now has 10, for one who has much will have more, and those who have nothing will have even that taken from them. And he is cast off into utter darkness where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. Whew. You can see why we needed to have such good music. But as we listened to the story and thought about it a little bit more, we realized it's not a story about management, it's not a story about economics, but it's a story about, well, us. And yes, the ones who invested, they did so wisely and they turned a profit, but they did so at risk. Even though 5 turned to 10 and 3 turned to 6, there was a risk involved and it could have gone the other way. So God isn't criticizing, and Jesus in the parable isn't criticizing taking a risk, nor is he simply rewarding it, because the other one took no risk at all. And that perhaps becomes the important point. He took no risk at all. And then, if you listen carefully to what he says to the master, he says to the master, I know that you're cruel and that you reap where you do not sow, you gather where you do not scatter seed. Therefore, I was afraid. And you wonder, how often do we think of God that way, or life that way, as something that's out to get us? We think of God as someone who scatters where God does not sow. In other words, there are parts of our lives that are all ours. They're not God's. Our life is not a gift from God. The things that we have to share are not related to God somehow. They belong to us. But I think this parable invites us to realize that that's never the case. That there is no part of our life that isn't worthy of God's attention. The trivial matters to God, and so does the great. And so for us to imagine that God simply sits back in judgment waiting to get us, or that life is simply a cruel joke ready to trip us up, well, if we truly believe that, we are going to live a life with, well, no risk. We'll do our best to keep ourselves safe from risk, from being hurt. We'll never say I love you because the person we love might not say it back. We'll never try something new because it might not work and we will feel foolish and alone. But the reality is, if we don't risk, if we don't trust God, in fact, we discover that we have just buried not only our talents but ourselves in the ground, and we have nothing to show for it. And then suddenly this utter darkness where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth becomes not so much a punishment that God has created for us, but in fact a prediction of what happens when you lead a life with no risk. A life where you imagine that God is out to get you, that life is only going to cheat you. That's what we talked about today. The invitation for us to risk, to try something we've never tried before, to risk just a little bit more than ever before. And sometimes there is an immediate return, and sometimes there is no return. I risked riding bareback on a horse once, and I fell off. But I know that God was with me in the risk, and in the fall, and in the recovery. That's the promise of God. God does not reap where God does not sow. God sows with us all the time. God is always with us. And so the invitation is to have that confidence, knowing that God is with us, and to dare to risk. That's what we did at Jubilee today. And, well, hopefully we'll get to see you next week. Thanks. God bless.